Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, make sure to hit subscribe so you never miss the new stories we share. Let's begin. The little girl couldn't have been more than 6 years old. She stood in front of me on that cold November morning in downtown Denver, Colorado, holding out a small cookie wrapped in crinkled plastic wrap. Her jacket was too thin for the weather. Her shoes had holes near the toes, and she was smiling at me like I was someone worth smiling at. "I made you a cookie, mister," she said. "It's chocolate chip. My mom helped me." I stopped walking. My briefcase felt heavy in my hand. My driver waited by the curb with the engine running. I had a meeting in 12 minutes that would close a deal worth $4 million, but this child stood in my path like she had all the time in the world. My name is Marcus Whitmore. At 52 years old, I owned 17 commercial properties across Colorado and Arizona. I drove a car that cost more than most people's homes. I wore suits that could pay someone's rent for 6 months, and I had become the kind of man who stepped over people without seeing them. "Why are you giving me a cookie?" I asked. My voice came out sharper than I intended. The girl didn't flinch. She just tilted her head, her brown pigtails swinging slightly. "Because you look sad," she said. "My grandma used to say cookies make sad people happy." Something twisted in my chest, a feeling I hadn't felt in years. I crouched down to her level, my knees protesting against the cold sidewalk. Up close, I could see the freckles scattered across her nose, the slight redness in her cheeks from the wind, the genuine warmth in her dark brown eyes. "What's your name?" I asked, softening my tone. "Emma," she said. "Emma Sullivan." The name meant nothing to me then. I didn't know it would mean everything later. "Where's your mother, Emma?" She pointed toward the corner where a woman in a worn gray coat stood watching us. The woman's posture was tense, protective. She had the look of someone who had been through something difficult, someone who expected the worst from strangers. I stood up and nodded toward the mother. She didn't nod back. "Take your cookie, mister," Emma insisted, pushing it toward me again. "Please, I made it special." I don't know why I took it. I never accepted things from strangers. I never stopped for anyone. But I took that cookie. And when my fingers closed around the plastic wrap, something shifted, like a door cracking open somewhere deep inside me that I thought I had sealed shut forever. "Thank you, Emma," I said. She beamed. That smile could have lit up the entire city block. Then she turned and ran back to her mother, her two big shoes slapping against the pavement. The mother grabbed her hand, shot me one last unreadable look, and they disappeared around the corner. I stood there holding a homemade cookie wrapped in plastic, while business people in expensive coats flowed around me like water around a stone. And I couldn't move, because something about that child had reached into my chest and grabbed hold of something I thought had died long ago. I didn't eat the cookie that day. Instead, I placed it on my desk in my corner office on the 32nd floor of the Whitmore building. I stared at it through 3 meetings. I looked at it while I signed documents that would make me another $500,000. A chocolate chip cookie made by a 6-year-old girl who thought I looked sad. Was I sad? I had everything: the penthouse in Cherry Creek, the vacation home in Scottsdale, the respect of every developer in the state. But respect isn't the same as love, and success isn't the same as happiness. My wife, Patricia, had left me 11 years ago. She said I had turned into someone she didn't recognize. Someone who cared more about profit margins than people. Someone who had forgotten how to be human. I told her she was being dramatic. She took our daughter, moved to Seattle, and I saw them once a year if I was lucky. My daughter, Sarah, was 23 now. She rarely returned my calls. The last time we spoke, she told me she was ashamed of what I did for a living. "You destroy people's lives, Dad," she said, "and you don't even see it." I told her it was just business, but sitting in my office that evening, staring at that cookie, I started to wonder if maybe everyone else was right and I was wrong. 3 days later, I saw Emma Sullivan again. I was leaving a property on the east side of Denver, one of my residential buildings, the kind of place where people paid rent they could barely afford to live in apartments that were barely maintained. I didn't like visiting these properties. They reminded me of where I came from. The cramped apartment in Aurora, where my mother worked double shifts just to keep the heat on. The nights I went to bed hungry because there wasn't enough food. I had clawed my way out of poverty through ruthlessness and determination. And somewhere along the way, I had become the very thing I once hated. Emma was sitting on the front steps of the building. She wore the same thin jacket, the same worn shoes, but today she wasn't smiling. She was crying. I stopped walking. Her mother sat beside her, arm wrapped around the child's shoulders, face buried in her hands. There were boxes stacked behind them, a few trash bags filled with belongings, and then I saw the eviction notice taped to the door, my company's letterhead, my signature. The world tilted beneath my feet. I had evicted them. I had signed the order 3 weeks ago without even looking at the names. Just another file, just another number. I had made a little girl homeless, and she had given me a cookie because I looked sad. The cruelty of it nearly brought me to my knees. I retreated to my car before they could see me. My hands were shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. My driver asked if I was all right. I told him to give me a minute. I needed to think. The Sullivans, Unit 4B, 3 months behind on rent. I remembered the file now. Single mother, 1 child, no emergency contact listed. The father wasn't in the picture. I had approved the eviction without a second thought. It was policy. 3 months behind meant they had to go. There were dozens of people waiting for that unit. People who could actually pay. That was what I told myself. But now, watching Emma Sullivan cry on those steps, I couldn't hide behind policy anymore. I pulled out my phone and called my assistant, Gerald. The Sullivan eviction, I said. Unit 4B on Maple Street, I need the full file. Gerald hesitated. Sir, that eviction was finalized this morning. They've already been removed from the... I know, I cut him off. Just send me everything you have, employment history, payment records, everything. An hour later, I was sitting in my penthouse reading through the file with growing horror. Rebecca Sullivan, 34 years old, former nurse's aide at St. Joseph's Hospital. She had been laid off 8 months ago when the hospital cut staff. She'd been working 2 part-time jobs since then, trying to keep up with rent while searching for full-time work. She had made partial payments. Every single month she had paid something, whatever she could scrape together. But partial wasn't enough for my company. Partial meant eviction, and Emma, little Emma who gave cookies to sad strangers. She had been pulled out of her kindergarten class at Jefferson Elementary because they had to move. She had been seeing the school counselor for anxiety after her father abandoned them 2 years ago. This child had already lost so much, and now I had taken her home. I set down the file and walked to my window. The city sprawled below me, glittering with lights. All those buildings, all those lives. How many of them had I touched without knowing? How many families had I displaced with the stroke of a pen? My mother's voice echoed in my memory. She had died 12 years ago, right before I made my first million. Cancer took her before she could see what I had become. Maybe that was a mercy. She used to tell me that success meant nothing if it came at the cost of your soul. She used to say that the measure of a person wasn't what they accumulated, but what they gave away. I had accumulated everything, and I had given away nothing. I picked up my phone and made a call I never thought I would make. Gerald, I need an address, a shelter, a motel, anywhere the Sullivans might have gone tonight. The silence on the other end stretched for a long moment. Sir, are you sure you want to do this? No, I wasn't sure of anything anymore. I found them at the Sunrise Family Shelter on Colfax Avenue. It was nearly 9 o'clock at night. The temperature had dropped to 28 degrees. The shelter was a converted warehouse, clean but crowded, filled with families who had nowhere else to go. I sat in my car for 20 minutes before I could make myself go inside. What was I supposed to say? I'm the man who took your home and now I want to help. The arrogance of it burned in my throat, but Emma's face wouldn't leave my mind. That smile, that cookie, that inexplicable kindness from a child who had every reason to be angry at the world. I walked through the shelter doors and asked to speak with Rebecca Sullivan. The volunteer at the desk looked me up and down, my cashmere coat, my Italian leather shoes, the gold watch on my wrist that cost more than most cars. She knew I didn't belong here, but she led me to a small room in the back where families could have private conversations. Rebecca walked in 5 minutes later. She recognized me immediately. Her face went pale, then red, then hard as stone. You, she said. The word carried years of exhaustion, frustration, and barely contained rage. I know who you are, she continued, her voice shaking. Your face is on the letterhead, Marcus Whitmore, the man who throws families out on the street. I didn't defend myself. There was nothing to defend. I came to apologize, I said quietly. She laughed. It was a bitter, broken sound. Apologize. My daughter cries herself to sleep every night because she doesn't understand why we can't go home. She thinks she did something wrong. She thinks it's her fault. The words hit me like physical blows. It's not her fault, I managed. I know it's not her fault. Rebecca's voice rose. It's your fault, you and your company and your policies that treat people like numbers on a spreadsheet. She was right about all of it. 3 years ago, my husband left, she said, her voice cracking. He just walked out, left me with a 2-year-old and nothing else. I worked 12-hour shifts just to keep us afloat, and when the hospital let me go, I still tried. I paid what I could. I begged your company for more time. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. They said no. They said policy is policy. I thought about all the times I had said those exact words, all the faces I had never bothered to see. And then my daughter, my sweet little girl, she sees you on the street looking miserable in your expensive suit, and what does she do? She gives you a cookie, because she has more kindness in her 6-year-old heart than you have in your entire body. I had no response to that, because she was absolutely right. I didn't ask Rebecca Sullivan to forgive me. I didn't deserve forgiveness. What I could offer was action. The next morning, I called an emergency meeting with my property management team. I told them we were implementing immediate changes, longer grace periods for tenants facing hardship, payment plan options, resources for job placement, and emergency assistance. They looked at me like I had lost my mind. Maybe I had. Maybe that was exactly what I needed. I personally ensured that the Sullivans were moved into a fully furnished apartment in a safer neighborhood, rent-free for 1 year. I connected Rebecca with a hospital system in Boulder that was actively hiring. She started as a full-time nurse's aide 3 weeks later, and Emma went back to school, a better school, one with art classes and a playground and a counselor who helped her understand that none of what happened was ever her fault. The first time I visited them in their new apartment, Emma ran to the door and hugged my legs before I could even say hello. "You came back," she said, grinning up at me. I didn't know what to say. I had spent my whole life keeping people at a distance. I had forgotten what it felt like to be embraced. Rebecca stood in the kitchen doorway watching. Her expression was still guarded. Trust doesn't rebuild overnight. I understood that. But she nodded at me, just a small nod, and somehow that felt like everything. Over the following months, something changed in me. I started visiting the shelters, not to write checks and leave, but to sit with families, to hear their stories, to understand the weight of what my company had been doing in the name of profit. I reconnected with my daughter, Sarah. I told her what had happened. I told her about Emma. I told her I was trying to become someone different. She cried on the phone. I cried too. For the first time in years, I let myself feel the full weight of who I had been. And slowly, painfully, I began to change. I still own my buildings. I still run my company. But I run it differently now. Because I learned something from a 6-year-old girl in a thin jacket who gave a cookie to a stranger. Kindness isn't weakness. Compassion isn't soft. Sometimes the smallest gesture from the most unexpected person can crack open a heart that the whole world thought was made of stone. Emma Sullivan taught me that, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of her cookie. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening to this story. It reminded me that we all have the power to change, no matter how far we've fallen. If this touched you, I hope you'll subscribe and visit the channel for more real-life stories that remind us what it means to be human.